With nothing more than a mushroom and a single white feather, this woman erased the world's most powerful emperor right at his dinner table. No armies, no blades, no mercy. Her name was Locusta, the first serial killer in history to be granted a legal license to kill. She was the ghost in the palace shadows, the woman who turned the entire Roman Empire into a human laboratory for the sadistic whims of Nero. Think you know the dark side of Rome? You haven't met its deadliest secret until now. History is written in blood, but often the ink is a colorless liquid hidden in a plain ceramic jar. Long before the names of emperors were whispered in fear, there lived a woman in the misty, untamed forests of Gaul. Her name was Locusta. She was not a warrior with a blade, nor a general with a legion. She was a chemist of death. But Gaul was too small for a talent so lethal. Driven by a dark ambition, or perhaps an invisible hand of fate, Locusta made her way to the heart of the world, Rome. She arrived as a ghost, blending into the filth and shadows of the Subura slums. There, in a cramped, stinking laboratory, she set up her cauldrons. It didn't take long for the elite of Rome to hear of the woman who could make problems disappear without leaving a mark. In these ancient woods, Locusta spent her youth not in prayer to the gods, but in communion with the soil. She studied the anatomy of silence. She knew which root could paralyze a heart, which mushroom could mimic a fever, and exactly how many drops of hemlock could turn a peaceful sleep into an eternal one. For years, she lived on the fringes of society, a phantom in the foliage, refining a craft that the world would soon call murder. She was arrested, labeled a witch, and cast into the deepest dungeons. But Locusta knew a secret the Senate didn't. In Rome, a professional killer isn't an enemy of the state, they are a luxury. As she sat behind iron bars, the shadow of the most powerful woman in the empire fell over her cell. Empress Agrippina didn't want Locusta dead, she wanted her hired. Power in ancient Rome was a zero-sum game. For Empress Agrippina, the goal was simple. Her son, Nero, must sit on the throne. The only obstacle? Her husband, the Emperor Claudius. A divorce was impossible. A public assassination was too risky. They needed the Locusta touch. Agrippina pulled Locusta from the darkness of the prison and placed her in the heart of the palace. The mission was clear. Create a toxin that would kill a god emperor, but look like the failings of an old man's body. Locusta set to work, selecting a basket of fine golden mushrooms, Claudius's greatest weakness. She infused them with a concentrated extract, a poison so subtle it would bypass the royal tasters. The night of the feast was a masterpiece of tension. Imagine the scene: the smell of roasted meats, the flow of expensive wine, and the emperor laughing, unaware that his death was plated before him. He took the first bite. The poison began its work immediately, boiling his blood from within. Claudius gasped, his face turning a sickly gray. But the emperor was a large man, and the first dose wasn't enough. As panic rose in the hall, the palace physician, Xenophon, a man already bought by Agrippina, stepped forward under the guise of aid. He reached for a white feather, a common tool to induce vomiting. But this feather had been dipped in Locusta's most potent concentrate. He thrust it down the emperor's throat. The cure was the killing blow. Claudius collapsed, a silent scream frozen on his lips, while Agrippina watched with eyes of cold, triumphant steel. The age of the poisoner had begun. With Claudius cold in the ground, Nero ascended, and at his side, hidden in the palace shadows, stood Locusta. She was no longer a criminal, she was a state asset. Nero didn't just use Locusta, he obsessed over her work. He gave her a modern laboratory, a staff of assistants, and an unlimited supply of test subjects. The palace halls became a house of horrors. Locusta would test her new formulas on slaves while Nero watched, stopwatch in hand, measuring the seconds it took for a human life to extinguish. If the poison was too slow, Nero would fly into a rage, striking Locusta for her incompetence. She was a prisoner of her own success, forced to innovate more brutal, more instant ways to kill. The ultimate test came with Britannicus, the rightful heir and Nero's rival. Nero demanded a poison that worked as fast as a sword. Locusta delivered. During a royal banquet, a cup of wine was served to the young Britannicus. It was purposefully too hot. When he asked for cold water to dilute it, the servant added the poison-laced water prepared by Locusta. The effect was instantaneous. Britannicus hit the floor before he could even set the cup down. He foamed at the mouth, his body convulsing in the dirt. The guests stood in horror, but Nero didn't even stop eating. "It's just an epileptic fit," he remarked casually. Nero was so pleased, he granted Locusta massive estates and even allowed her to open a school. Yes, a school, where she taught the next generation of Roman elite how to identify and use the very toxins that kept Nero on his throne. But in Rome, the wheel of fortune never stops turning. Nero's madness eventually pushed the empire too far. As the legions revolted and the palace emptied, the Bao Chua found himself alone. His only remaining friend was the woman who had helped him kill his way to the top. Nero begged Locusta for one final gift, a dose of poison, so he could die by his own hand before the mob reached him. She gave it to him, a small vial, her final masterpiece. Nero fled, and though he eventually used a blade instead of her poison, the legacy of Locusta was sealed. When the new emperor, Galba, seized power, he didn't see a legendary chemist. He saw a monster that needed to be purged. Locusta was hunted down on her vast estates. She was dragged back to the city she had quietly terrorized for decades. The execution was not quick, nor was it private. According to the dark legends of the time, she was paraded through the streets in chains, her face pelted with stones by the very citizens who feared her shadow. Some stories say she was thrown to a wild beast, a symbolic end for a woman who lived her life as a predator in a garden of poisonous flowers. They burned her school. They smashed her vials into the gutters. They attempted a damnatio memoriae, to erase her name from every scroll and monument. But you cannot erase a shadow. Locusta remains the world's first professional assassin. A reminder that the most dangerous weapon in history isn't always a legion of soldiers. Sometimes it's just a woman, a forest, and a very deep understanding of the dark side of nature.